Hey, so I wanted to make a video for you this week to go over what you're going to be reading for this week, but also there are a couple of pointers that I'm seeing repeatedly in your writing that I want to go over as a group. So this week we are going to be starting an area, well, sort of continuing with modernism, but modernism is changing some as the result of the Great Depression and the Harlem Renaissance, and there's a new thing called the Southern Gothic, which you're going to be introduced to this week, but then we will really talk about next week. You're going to be reading William Faulkner and Richard Wright. Faulkner, though, is going to be someone we're going to stick with for 2 weeks because there's another story that I'm going to ask you to read with him. And then we're going to look at some critical lenses. Critical lenses are sort of like the filter through which you would view something, a work, a movie, a novel. And that critical lens might be like a feminist approach, like how are women treated in this? It might be a racial approach, like how are African Americans treated in this? It could even be like a psychoanalytic approach, like how is this person's subconscious playing out as a character? So we are going to start that this week. I've got a piece of critical literature that I want you to read so you can see how people who work at analyzing literature professionally, how they arrive at meaning in a work. And then there's a video that you're going to watch, and this is all in preparation for next week. But this week, you're going to be reading 2 stories that I think sort of, they pair together nicely. One is William Faulkner's Barn Burning, and then the other one is Richard Wright's The Man Who Was Almost a Man. They both deal with a circumstance in America that many of us are no longer familiar with called sharecropping. Sharecropping really disenfranchised poor people of any race because people would live on someone else's property and they would work that property and it's called sharecropping because they would benefit somewhat. They would get some of the proceeds from the crops that they grew, but they basically were in a sense of indentured servitude where the owner of the property could charge whatever they wanted to for rent. They could pay as little as possible, saying that the livelihood that I'm providing to the person is the payment. So, I don't have to pay you as much because you're living in a house that I provided for you. So it's really a bad arrangement. And in both of these stories, you're going to see how that plays out in the lives of these young characters and in the resentment of their parents. So that's what you're going to be reading this week. And I've asked you to give yourself about an hour to read each of those. And then this is the critical theory thing that I wanted you to read called Resentment, Race, and Prejudice. It's an analysis that someone has done on these stories. Then in the part of what do I want you to actually do, there's a journal entry here that asks you to answer some questions on barn burning and The Man Who Was Always a Man, because I want you to sort of think about those together. And then there's a video here on critical lenses, which I just mentioned briefly. You're going to start at minute 3 and then continue, because this was a video that I took from somebody who was doing like an assignment, and then they started talking about the critical lenses. So things get going at minute 3. Now, in this journal on barn burning and The Man Who Was Almost a Man, I'm asking you to find supporting details and to practice citing those details. And that's a direction that students in the past have often ignored. What I mean by citing specific details, that means that you need to provide some quotes. He said this, or the narrator described him as this, and that goes in quotation marks. And then the practice, the citing, is what most of you are doing in your papers now, but I want to make sure that you do it correctly. So I want to take you over here to this Google Doc where I have a few things that I've typed out. So when you are citing something, so I have when the speaker says, "Let America be America again." Actually, that should not be capitalized because it's not in the poem. I'm not talking about the title, I'm talking about the poem. When the speaker says, "Let America be America again," this is a plea for America to live up to its promises. Now, the writer is Langston Hughes. I made up this page number, but I want you to see several things. First, your quotation may appear anywhere in the sentence, but the citation doesn't go until the end. Second, if it's a quotation in the middle of the sentence, that comma goes inside the quotation mark, okay? That's one of my pet peeves. And then finally, it's the last name of the author of the poem and the page number, and then parentheses and a period. Several of you are citing this as being Levine or Levine, however he pronounces his last name. He's the editor of the Norton Anthology. But I've mentioned several times that you are looking for a work in an anthology. So you can Google how to cite a work in an anthology. Because Langston Hughes wrote the poem, he still gets the credit for it. And the way works cited works is that whatever you have right here is what should be right here. Okay? So Hughes is the guy who wrote it. He's the one you're citing. And then this is the first part of the citation. The whole purpose of works cited in academia would be that you have read something and you're like, where is that from? You go to the works cited and then you find out. Now, I have the title here, Work Cited, because there's only one work that I cited this time. If you have more than one work, it's works cited. But if you're just citing one work from our anthology, it's a work cited. And you'll notice here that a work cited has a hanging indent. And here I've done an example of what a work from an anthology looks like. Because Hughes still gets credit as the writer. So the author is still first. The title of the work goes next. And then the long title of our anthology goes here. Followed by, edited by Robert S. Levine. Followed by the publisher and the year that it was published. Notice that book titles, big things, are italicized, and little things like short stories and poems go in quotation marks. And notice again that I put my period inside the quotation mark here. That's a rule. That's something you just need to memorize, that when you have quotation marks, the punctuation goes inside. Okay, so I hope that's helpful, because I do want you, when you're answering those questions about the Richard Wright and the not Langston Hughes, William Faulkner, I want you to use quotations, citing evidence, and using a citation at the end of that evidence that you cite. Remember, it goes to the end of the sentence, not in the middle of the sentence, regardless of where your quotation was. Okay? We are continuing to practice this citing stuff because I'm about to add another item that can go in the major assignments category. You are rocking the poetry. I hope you're doing it independently. I've tried to build these assignments so that they benefit you to do them independently. Do not start Googling stuff. That is a bad idea. I want to know what you think, not what Google came up with. All right. Take care. Have a good week.